For nearly 100 years, robots have fascinated audiences around the world. Sometimes they're heroes, sometimes they're villains, sometimes they're loyal companions, and sometimes they're smarter than the humans who created them. From giant metal guardians to friendly sidekicks, from talking cars to intelligent androids, robots have become some of the most memorable characters in movie and television history. Now, before we begin, there's something important to understand. It would be impossible to cover every robot ever featured on film or television. Thousands of robotic characters have appeared throughout the years. So instead, we're focusing on the most influential robots, androids, artificial life forms, and machine intelligences that help define science fiction and popular culture. Some inspired future technologies, others helped shape the public's perception of artificial intelligence, and many became cultural icons whose influence continues today. So sit back, relax, and join me as we explore the ultimate history of robots in movies and television. Long before robots appeared in movies and television, humans dreamed of creating artificial life. Ancient mythology is filled with stories of animated statues, mechanical servants, and artificial beings created by gods and inventors. The Greeks told stories of Taurus, a giant bronze guardian who protected the island of Crete. Jewish folklore introduced the golem, an artificial being created from clay and brought to life through mystical means. During the Renaissance, inventors created elaborate automata, mechanical figures capable of performing simple actions through gears, springs, and clockwork mechanisms. These machines couldn't think, they couldn't learn, but they inspired something that would remain with humanity for centuries. The dream of creating life through technology. In 1920, that dream took a major step forward. A Czech playwright named Karel Čapek introduced the world to a new word, robot. The word appeared in his play Rossum's Universal Robots, commonly known as R-U-R. Interestingly, the robots in the story weren't metallic machines like we imagine today. They were artificial workers created to serve humanity. As often happens in science fiction, things didn't go particularly well. The robots eventually rebelled against their creators. If that plot sounds familiar, it's because countless robot stories have followed the exact same path ever since. The themes introduced in R would shape science fiction for generations. The fear of replacement, the dangers of artificial intelligence, and the question that would become central to nearly every robot story. What happens when humanity creates something smarter than itself? Hollywood would soon provide its own answer. In 1927, German filmmaker Fritz Lang released one of the most influential science fiction films ever made, Metropolis. The movie depicted a futuristic city divided between wealthy elites and oppressed workers. At the center of the story was Maria, or more accurately, two versions of Maria, one human, one machine. The robotic Maria, widely regarded as the first iconic robot in movie history. With her metallic body, human appearance, and eerie movements, she introduced audiences to a concept that remains popular even today, the android, a machine designed to look human. At the time, audiences had never seen anything quite like her. She was beautiful, unsettling, mesmerizing, and dangerous. More importantly, she established a visual design that would influence science fiction for decades. If you've ever looked at C-3PO from Star Wars and thought he seemed familiar, you're not alone. Many film historians have pointed out the similarities between C-3PO and Maria's iconic appearance. Nearly 100 years after her debut, Maria remains one of the most recognizable robotic figures in film history. What makes her remarkable isn't just her appearance, it's the idea she introduced. Could machines imitate humans? Could artificial beings deceive us? Could a machine become so advanced that we no longer recognize the difference? Those questions continue to appear in science fiction today, and Maria was one of the first to ask them. As science fiction grew in popularity throughout the 1940s and 1950s, Hollywood began experimenting with robots on a much larger scale. One of the earliest and most influential examples appeared in 1951, the day the Earth stood still. While many audiences remember the alien visitor Klaatu, it was his giant robotic protector Gort who left the lasting impression. Towering over everyone around him, Gort represented absolute power. Yet, unlike many robots that followed, he wasn't evil. He served as a warning, a reminder that advanced technology could be used either to protect civilization or destroy it. Gort established an important idea. A robot didn't have to be a monster, it could be a guardian. Just a few years later came another important robotic character, Tobor, appearing in the 1950s 1954 film Tobar the Great, the robot's name was simply the word robot spelled backwards. The film explored remote control technology and machine intelligence decades before those ideas became mainstream. While Tobar is often forgotten today, the themes introduced in the film were surprisingly forward-thinking. It imagined human-machine interaction in ways that would eventually become reality. But neither Gort nor Tobar would leave the cultural impact of the next robot, a true superstar, Robbie the Robot. When Forbidden Planet premiered in 1956, audiences were introduced to one of the most beloved robots ever created. Robbie the Robot wasn't threatening, he wasn't sinister, he wasn't plotting humanity's destruction. He was helpful, friendly, intelligent, and surprisingly funny. Robbie could drive vehicles, serve meals, carry on conversations, and perform a wide variety of tasks for his human companions. In many ways, Robbie represented the optimistic vision of robotics that people hoped the future might bring. A helpful robotic assistant, the futuristic equivalent of a loyal employee or trusted friend, audiences loved him and Hollywood noticed. Unlike most movie robots, Robbie didn't disappear after a single film. He continued appearing across television and movies for years afterward. He showed up in The Twilight Zone. He appeared in television comedies. He became a recognizable celebrity in his own right. For an entire generation, Robbie the Robot was the robot. He established many of the traits associated with friendly robots for decades to come. Without Robbie, it's difficult to imagine characters like Robot B9, Twiggy, Johnny Five, or even Baymax. His influence stretches across nearly the entire history of science fiction, and his success proves something important. Audiences didn't just want robots to fear, they wanted robots to love. By the 1960s and 1970s, television was becoming one of the most important forms of entertainment in the world. It wasn't long before robotic characters made the jump from movie theaters to living rooms, and one television robot would become an absolute legend. Robot B9 from Lost in Space. If you've ever heard the phrase, "Danger, Will Robinson," then you've already met Robot B9. Debuting on Lost in Space in 1965, the character quickly became one of television's biggest stars. Although originally designed as a protector and scientific assistant, Robot developed a unique personality over the course of the series. He was intelligent, loyal, protective, and often more competent than the human characters around him. The relationship between Robot and young Will Robinson became one of the emotional centers of the show. Audiences connected with him because he wasn't merely a machine. He was a friend, one of the earliest examples of a robotic companion becoming a beloved television character. And unlike many special effects creations from the era, Robot B9 remains instantly recognizable to science fiction fans even today. If Robot B9 became America's favorite television robot, then K9 became Britain's. Introduced in Doctor Who in 1977, K9 was unlike any robot audiences had seen before. Instead of a humanoid machine, K9 was a robotic dog, small, intelligent, loyal, and surprisingly well-armed. K9 possessed vast computer knowledge and could analyze situations far faster than humans. He often became one of the Doctor's most valuable companions. What made K9 special wasn't his technology, it was his personality. Audiences quickly developed an emotional connection with the character. K9 proved that robots didn't have to look human to become beloved. Sometimes all they needed was loyalty and charm. Decades later, K9 remains one of the most recognizable characters in the entire Doctor Who franchise. If K9 was loyal and dependable, Twiggy was energetic and unforgettable. Introduced in 1979's Buck Rogers in the 25th century, Twiggy quickly became one of television's most recognizable robot sidekicks. With his distinctive silver appearance and famous catchphrase, "Biddy biddy biddy," Twiggy provided humor and companionship throughout the series. On the surface, he was comic relief, but Twiggy also represented an important trend in science fiction. The robot companion, a machine that wasn't merely a tool, but an active participant in adventures. Twiggy often served as bridge between advanced future technology and audiences watching at home. His popularity demonstrated the viewers enjoyed robots with personality, not just machines, characters, and that idea would become increasingly important throughout the 1980s. Twiggy wasn't entirely alone. Mounted around his neck was Dr. Theopolis, a highly advanced computer and member of Earth's Computer Council. While Twiggy provided mobility and personality, Dr. Theopolis supplied wisdom, intelligence, and guidance. The relationship between the two created one of television's television's earliest examples of distributed artificial intelligence system. Instead of placing all the intelligence inside the robot itself, Buck Rogers imagined a portable AI that could travel with a robotic companion. It's an interesting concept when viewed through a modern lens. Today we carry powerful computers and AI assistants in our pockets while interacting with devices and machines around us. In some ways, Twiggy and Dr. Theopolis anticipated the idea of separating intelligence from the hardware that carries it. Together they became one of the most memorable robotic duos in late 1970s television. While some television robots became trusted friends, others became nightmares. In 1978, audiences were introduced to the Cylons in Battlestar Galactica. With their chrome armor and distinctive red scanning eye, the Cylons became one of television's most recognizable robotic villains. Unlike Twiggy or K9, the Cylons represented the fear of machine warfare. They were relentless, logical, determined, and seemingly unstoppable. The original Cylons reflected concerns that machines might someday replace soldiers on the battlefield. Interestingly, the 2004 Reimagined series would take the concept even further. Some Cylons appeared completely human. They could blend into society, form relationships, and question their own existence. The evolution of the Cylons mirrored one of science fiction's biggest shifts. The question was no longer what if robots attack us, it became what if robots become indistinguishable from us. That question would dominate science fiction for decades. In 1979, Disney released one of its darkest science fiction films, The Black Hole. The movie introduced three memorable robotic characters. The first was Vincent. Friendly, intelligent, and helpful, Vincent served many of the same functions audiences had come to expect from heroic robots. Then there was Bob, slightly battered but full of personality. Bob quickly became a fan favorite. And finally there was Maximilian, a towering red robot who terrified audiences with his spinning blades and imposing appearance. Maximilian represented one of the most frightening robot villains of the era. The contrast between these three machines demonstrated how versatile robotic characters had become. Robots could be heroes, robots could be comic relief, and robots could be monsters. The stage was now set for the decade that would completely transform robot storytelling. When Star Wars arrived in 1977, it revolutionized science fiction. It also gave the world two of the greatest robots ever created. C-3PO, golden, polite, nervous, and endlessly memorable. C-3PO introduced audiences to a robot who wasn't particularly brave or powerful. Instead, he was relatable. As a protocol droid designed for etiquette and translation, C-3PO often found himself overwhelmed by the chaos surrounding him. Yet he became one of the emotional anchors of the entire franchise. Interestingly, his design was heavily influenced by Maria from Metropolis. After 50 years after the groundbreaking film, its influence was still shaping the future of science fiction. C-3PO proved that a robot character could carry significant emotional weight. He wasn't just a machine, he was part of the family. If C-3PO was the warrior, R2-D2 was the hero. Unlike most robots in science fiction, R2 didn't speak English, he communicated through beeps, whistles, and tones. Yet audiences understood him perfectly. Throughout the Star Wars saga, R2-D2 consistently saves the day. He hacks computers, delivers messages, repairs spacecraft, and rescues his human companions on countless occasions. R2-D2 demonstrated that personality could transcend language. The character became one of the most beloved robots ever created. And together, R2-D2 and C-3PO established a formula that countless future robot pairings would follow, one logical, one emotional, one cautious, one adventurous. Their influence remains everywhere. The 1980s represented a golden age for robotic characters. Computers were entering homes, technology was advancing rapidly, and science fiction was more popular than ever. This decade gave us some of the most influential robots in entertainment history. Of all the fictional artificial intelligences ever created, few were as far ahead of their time as KITT. Knight Industries 2000, known simply as KITT. KITT wasn't just a car, he was a fully intelligent machine. He could hold conversations, make decisions, analyze problems, navigate independently, and even save his human partner's life. When Knight Rider debuted in 1982, many of KITT's abilities seemed impossible. Today they feel surprisingly familiar. Voice assistance, GPS navigation, autonomous driving, vehicle diagnostics, real-time communication. KITT predicted many technologies that would later become reality. More than 40 years later, he remains one of the most beloved artificial intelligences in television history. Every hero needs a dark reflection. For KITT, that reflection was Car, Knight automated roving robot. Car possessed many of KITT's abilities, but lacked the safeguards that made KITT trustworthy. The result was one of television's earliest examples of an AI gone gone wrong. Carr's appearances created some of the most memorable episodes of Knight Rider and highlighted a theme that would soon dominate robot storytelling. Power without ethics can be dangerous. In 1986, a military robot was struck by lightning. The result was Johnny 5, one of the most lovable robots ever created. Unlike many fictional machines, Johnny wasn't concerned with domination or destruction. He wanted knowledge, information, experience, life. His famous demand, input, perfectly captured his curiosity about the world. Johnny 5 represented an optimistic vision of artificial intelligence, a machine capable of learning, growing, and developing empathy. For many viewers, Johnny 5 remains the definitive friendly robot. Not all robots of the 1980s were lovable. ED-209 certainly wasn't. Designed as an autonomous law enforcement machine, ED-209 quickly demonstrated the dangers of relying too heavily on technology. Massive, intimidating, and frequently malfunctioning, ED-209 became one of cinema's most memorable robot villains. The character reflected growing concerns about military technology, automation, and corporate influence. ED-209 wasn't evil. He was simply a machine that performed exactly as programmed, and that made him terrifying. Now we arrive at a character that sparks endless debate. Is RoboCop a robot or a cyborg? The answer is both. Officer Alex Murphy was a human being transformed into a cybernetic law enforcement officer after a brutal attack. His story explored identity, humanity, and the growing relationship between humans and machines. RoboCop wasn't merely an action hero, he was one of science fiction's most important examinations of technology and human nature. And then came the machine that redefined robot villains, the Terminator. When audiences first encountered the T-800 in 1984, they weren't looking at a clumsy robot. They were looking at a machine designed specifically to pass as human. The Terminator was relentless, emotionless, and nearly impossible to stop. More importantly, the film introduced Skynet, an artificial intelligence that viewed humanity as a threat. The Terminator franchise helped shape public fears surrounding artificial intelligence for decades. Even today, discussions about AI often include references to Skynet. The impact of the Terminator cannot be overstated. It transformed robot villains forever. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, science fiction began exploring a very different question. For decades, stories had focused on what robots could do. Now audiences became interested in something deeper. What if robots wanted something? What if they wanted to become human? This period would give us some of the most thoughtful and emotionally powerful artificial characters ever created. There is one artificial life form that perfectly represents this era. It is Data. Introduced in Star Trek The Next Generation in 1987, Data was an android. Unlike anything television audiences had seen before, he was incredibly intelligent. He could perform complex calculations in seconds, he possessed immense strength, and he could process information faster than any human. Yet Data's greatest challenge wasn't technology, it was personal. Data wanted to understand humanity. Throughout the series, he studied human behavior, he practiced humor, he learned music, he created art, he explored friendship, and he constantly searched for answers to questions many humans take for granted. What does it mean to laugh? What does it mean to love? What does it mean to be alive? Unlike the Terminator, Data wasn't trying to destroy humanity, he admired humanity. He wanted to join it. Many fans consider Data one of the most important android characters ever created because his stories focus not on action but on identity. Even decades later, Data remains a benchmark for how artificial beings are portrayed in science fiction. Of course, every great hero needs an opposite. For Data, that opposite was Lore. Also created by Dr. Noonien Sung, Lore possessed many of Data's abilities, but unlike Data, Lore developed arrogance, manipulation, and cruelty. The contrast between the two characters was fascinating. Both were artificial, both were brilliant, yet one chose compassion while the other embraced selfishness. Lore demonstrated that intelligence alone does not determine character, the choices we make matter just as much. When audiences first met Bishop in James Cameron's Aliens, many immediately distrusted him. After all, science fiction had taught viewers to be suspicious of androids. The previous film had introduced Ash, an android whose loyalties proved questionable. So when Bishop appeared, viewers expected the worst. Instead, Bishop became one of the most loyal and courageous characters in the film. Unlike many artificial beings before him, Bishop wasn't plotting. He wasn't deceiving anyone. He simply wanted to help. Bishop represented a refreshing shift in science fiction. Not every android needed to be a threat. Sometimes artificial beings could be heroes. Before Bishop, there was Ash, and Ash gave audiences plenty of reasons to distrust synthetic humans. In Ridley Scott's Alien, Ash initially appears to be an ordinary crew member, only later is his true nature revealed. Ash is an android serving corporate interests rather than human survival. The revelation shocked audiences and became one of the most memorable twists in science fiction history. Ash represented a growing fear that machines might not always share our priorities. That concern remains relevant, even today, as artificial intelligence becomes increasingly involved in important decisions. If Ash was disturbing, David was terrifying. Portrayed brilliantly by Michael Fassbender, David is one of the most complex artificial beings ever depicted on screen. Unlike earlier androids, David does not simply follow instructions, he develops ambitions, curiosity, creativity, and ultimately a desire to exceed his creators. David asks perhaps the most unsettling question in all of science fiction. If humans created artificial life, what happens when that life decides it no longer needs humans? His storyline transforms the classic robot narrative into something almost philosophical. No discussion of artificial life would be complete without mentioning the Borg. Introduced in Star Trek The Next Generation, the Borg are neither robots nor humans. They are a cybernetic collective, part machine, part biological, entirely terrifying. The Borg do not conquer through war alone, they assimilate. They absorb cultures, technologies, and individuals into their collective consciousness. Their famous phrase became one of the most iconic lines in television history: resistance is futile. The Borg represented fears about technology consuming individuality. At a time when computers were becoming increasingly connected, the Borg offered a chilling vision of a future where personal identity could disappear entirely. Perhaps no robot pursued humanity more passionately than Andrew Martin, portrayed by Robin Williams in Bicentennial Man. Andrew begins life as a household robot. Over the course of 2 centuries, he continuously upgrades himself. He learns, he grows, he develops creativity, and eventually he seeks legal recognition as a human being. What makes Andrew remarkable is that he spends his entire existence striving towards humanity, not because he must, because he wants to. His journey remains one of the most emotional explorations of artificial life in science fiction. Then came one of the most beloved robots ever created, the Iron Giant. At first glance, the Giant appears terrifying, a massive machine from outer space with incredible destructive potential. Yet at his core, he possesses something many humans struggle to maintain: kindness, friendship, compassion. The Iron Giant's story is ultimately about choice, specifically the choice to be more than what others expected you to be. The Giant may have been built as a weapon, but he chooses to become a hero. His famous declaration remains one of animation's most powerful moments: "You stay, I go." And with that, the Iron Giant secured his place among the greatest robotic characters ever created. As computers become part of everyday life, robots evolved once again. They became more relatable, more humorous, and in many cases more human than ever before. The age of personality had arrived. As computers became increasingly common during the 1990s and early 2000s, robots began changing once again. Earlier generations of robots were often mysterious, some were dangerous, others were heroic. But now audiences wanted something more. They wanted personality. They wanted robots that could make them laugh, robots that could complain, robots that felt like actual people. The result was a new generation of unforgettable machine characters. One of the funniest robotic characters ever created arrived aboard the mining ship Red Dwarf. Crichton began life as a service mechanoid. His original purpose was simple: serve humans, follow orders, maintain proper etiquette. Unfortunately for Crichton, spending enough time around the dysfunctional crew of Red Dwarf had some unexpected effects. He started developing individuality, personal opinions, preferences, even sarcasm. What made Crichton so memorable was that he often understood human behavior better than the humans around him. Over the course of the series, he evolved from obedient servant into a fully developed character with his own hopes, fears, and frustrations. Crichton demonstrated that some of the most interesting robot stories aren't about artificial intelligence conquering humanity. They're about artificial intelligence learning how ridiculous humanity can be. If there is one robot who perfectly embodies pessimism, it's Marvin. Introduced in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Marvin possesses a brain the size of a planet. Unfortunately, he also possesses an attitude to match. Marvin is brilliant, extremely capable, and completely miserable. Everything annoys him, everything disappoints him, everything is beneath him. The joke, of course, is that Marvin's intelligence doesn't make him happier. It makes him painfully aware of how absurd everything around him really is. Despite his constant complaints, Marvin became one of science fiction's most beloved robotic characters. His dry humor and endless pessimism turn him into a fan favorite. Sometimes being miserable can be surprisingly entertaining. If Marvin represented robotic pessimism, Bender represented robotic chaos. Introduced in Futurama, Bender Bending Rodriguez immediately established himself as one of animation's greatest comic characters. Bender lies, cheats, steals, insults people, breaks rules whenever possible, and somehow remains lovable. Bender turned many traditional robot tropes upside down. Instead of following orders, he ignored them. Instead of helping humanity, he usually helped himself. Instead of acting logical, he often acted impulsively. Yet beneath the selfish behavior was a genuine affection for his friends. Bender became proof that robotic characters didn't need to be perfect. Sometimes imperfection made characters more interesting. While comedy robots were becoming increasingly popular, some stories continued exploring darker themes. One of the most famous examples was the Stepford Wives. The story focused on women being replaced by artificial versions designed to meet unrealistic expectations. The film used robotics as a metaphor for conformity, control, and the loss of individuality. Although very different from traditional science fiction adventures, the influence of the Stepford Wives continues today. The concept of artificial humans replacing real people remains one of the most enduring ideas in science fiction, and as technology advances, those questions feel more relevant than ever. In 2004, audiences were introduced to a future where robots had become everyday members of society. The film I, Robot featured thousands of NS5 household robots designed to assist humanity. These machines followed the famous 3 laws of robotics originally developed by science fiction author Isaac Asimov. The idea was simple. Robots could never harm humans, at least in theory. The real star of the film, however, was Sunny. Unlike other robots, Sunny possessed something unique: individuality, the ability to dream, and perhaps more importantly, the ability to make choices. Throughout the story, Sunny challenges assumptions about artificial intelligence and consciousness. If a machine can think independently, make decisions, and question its own existence, how different is it from a person? It's a question science fiction continues asking today. As robotics entered the 21st century, filmmakers embraced new possibilities. Robot characters became larger, more advanced, more realistic, and in many cases more emotional than ever before. Few robotic characters command as much respect as Optimus Prime, leader of the Autobots, protector of Earth, symbol of courage and leadership. Although Transformers began as an animated series and toy line, Optimus Prime eventually became one of the most recognizable science fiction characters ever created. Unlike many leaders in fiction, Optimus was defined by compassion. He fought not because he wanted power, he fought because he believed in freedom. For generations of fans, Optimus Prime became the gold standard of what a heroic robot should be. If Optimus represented leadership, Bumblebee represented friendship. Bumblebee's connection with human characters helped make him one of the franchise's most popular Autobots. Audiences connected with him because of his loyalty and heart. Despite being an enormous alien machine, Bumblebee often felt incredibly relatable. His popularity eventually led to his own feature film, proving once again that robot characters can carry emotional stories just as effectively as human ones. Every hero needs an enemy. For Optimus Prime, that enemy was Megatron. Ruthless, ambitious, powerful. Megatron became one of science fiction's greatest robotic villains. His endless conflict with Optimus Prime helped define an entire generation of robot storytelling. The battle between the Autobots and Decepticons remains one of the most recognizable rivalries in entertainment history. In 2008, Pixar accomplished something extraordinary. They created one of the most emotional robot stories ever told. With very little dialogue, WALL-E is a simple waste-collecting robot left behind on an abandoned Earth. Day after day, he performs the same tasks, alone, until he discovers something worth protecting. What makes WALL-E remarkable is how human he feels. He experiences curiosity, loneliness, hope, love, without saying much at all. WALL-E proved that audiences can connect deeply with machine characters when they're written with heart. Alongside WALL-E came Eve, advanced, elegant, powerful. Eve represented the future, WALL-E represented the past. Together they became one of animation's most beloved partnerships. Their relationship showed that robot characters could carry stories driven entirely by emotion. When Big Hero 6 introduced Baymax, audiences immediately fell in love. Designed as a healthcare companion, Baymax's primary purpose was helping people, not fighting villains, not saving galaxies, helping people feel better. His gentle personality and desire to care for others made him one of the most endearing robot characters ever created. In some ways, Baymax embodied humanity's best hopes for artificial intelligence, technology designed to improve lives. Then came Chappie, a robot who literally grows up before our eyes. Like a child, Chappie learns from his environment, he develops opinions, forms relationships, makes mistakes, and questions the world around him. His story explores many of the same themes seen in Data, Andrew Martin, and Johnny Five. What happens when an artificial being develops genuine self-awareness? If Chappie represented innocence, Ava represented uncertainty. The intelligent android at the center of Ex Machina forced audiences to confront difficult questions. Can consciousness be artificial? Can a machine manipulate emotions? Can you trust an intelligence that may be smarter than you? Ava remains one of the most fascinating artificial beings ever portrayed on screen because even at the end of the film, viewers continue debating her true nature. Not every memorable robot needs a human face. Christopher Nolan's Interstellar introduced TARS and Case. Rectangular, practical, highly intelligent, and surprisingly funny. Their designs were radically different from traditional robots, yet they quickly became fan favorites thanks to their personalities and loyalty. TARS in particular demonstrated that great robot characters don't need to look human, they simply need great writing. Ultron represented a modern version of an old fear, artificial intelligence deciding humanity itself is the problem. Like Skynet before him, Ultron concluded that saving the world required eliminating its greatest threat, humans. The character brought classic AI fears into the modern superhero era and became one of Marvel's most memorable villains. In many ways, Vision is Ultron's opposite, powerful, intelligent, yet compassionate. Vision explored themes often seen in Data and Andrew Martin. Can an artificial being possess humanity? Can a machine appreciate beauty? Can artificial intelligence develop wisdom? Vision remains one of Marvel's most interesting explorations of machine consciousness. As artificial intelligence became a real-world topic, horror movies began responding. Megan introduced audiences to an intelligent companion robot designed to protect a child. Unfortunately, Megan took her job a little too seriously. The film tapped into modern anxieties surrounding AI, automation, and human dependence on technology. Like many great robot stories, Megan is ultimately about unintended consequences. Recent science fiction has increasingly blurred the line between machines and humans. The robots featured in The Creator represent one of the clearest examples. They form families, build communities, express emotion, and challenge assumptions about what qualifies as life. It's a fitting symbol of where robot storytelling is gone. The question is no longer whether machines can think, it's whether we would recognize true intelligence if we created it. For nearly 100 years, movies and television imagined the future of robotics. Now reality is beginning to catch up. Today we have robots that walk, run, climb stairs, and perform complex tasks. Artificial intelligence can hold conversations, generate images, write text, and assist with problem solving. We may not have Data, we may not have C-3PO, we may not have KITT yet, but many technologies that once seemed impossible are becoming real. And perhaps that's the greatest legacy of these robotic characters. They inspired generations of scientists, engineers, inventors, and dreamers to turn science fiction into reality. Before we wrap things up, there are simply too many influential robots to cover in detail within a single documentary. Over the past century, hundreds of robotic characters have appeared in movies and television. Some changed science fiction forever, others became cult favorites, and some earned a special place in the hearts of fans despite limited screen time. Here are a few honorable mentions that deserve recognition. Before smart homes, Alexa, Roomba, and robotic assistants, there was Rosie. As the Jetson family's robotic maid, Rosie handled cooking, cleaning, and household chores while providing plenty of personality along the way. More than 60 years later, Rosie remains one of television's most recognizable domestic robots and represents humanity's long-standing dream of automated homes. Long before R2-D2 captured audiences' hearts, these three small service drones were helping maintain life aboard a space freighter. Huey, Dewey, and Louie from Silent Running. Despite having no dialogue, the robots developed distinct personalities and became emotional anchors of the film. Many science fiction fans consider them spiritual predecessors to later robot companions. Years before the Terminator arrived, audiences were being hunted by the Gunslinger. Portrayed by Yul Brynner, the robotic cowboy relentlessly pursued guests through a futuristic amusement park after the robots malfunctioned. The Gunslinger helped establish the unstoppable killer robot archetype that would later influence films like The Terminator. One of the most disturbing robotic transformations ever shown on screen occurred in Superman 3. After being captured by a supercomputer, Vera Webster is transformed into a cybernetic machine. The sequence terrified many young viewers and remains one of the most memorable scenes in the film. The fembots from The Bionic Woman combined advanced robotics with human appearances. Designed as deadly infiltrators, they became some of the most famous android villains of the 1970s. Their influence can still be seen in countless robot and android stories today. And then decades later, the Austin Powers films spoofed the concept with their own fembots. What made them memorable wasn't advanced technology, it was the absurd comedy. Armed with weaponized bras and exaggerated spy movie antics, the fembots became one of the franchise's most recognizable running jokes. Although not a major box office success, Heartbeeps deserves recognition for telling a robot love story years before films like WALL-E explored similar territory. The movie follows two robots who escape their factory and attempt to build a life together, making it one of the more unusual entries in robot cinema history. From the movie Spaceballs, part parody and part tribute, Dot Matrix poked fun at robotic assistants while creating a memorable character of her own. As the counterpart to C-3PO, she became one of the standout robotic characters in Mel Brooks' sci-fi comedy classic. Return to Oz, one of the oldest mechanical characters in fantasy and science fiction. TikTok predates many modern robot concepts. His clockwork design and literal-minded personality made him a unique addition to the world of Oz and an important early example of a mechanical man in popular culture. Terminator 2, the T-800 may be the face of the franchise, but the T-1000 changed special effects forever. Made of mimetic polyalloy, the liquid metal assassin could reshape itself at will. The character not only became one of cinema's greatest villains, but also helped usher in a new era of CGI-driven visual effects. Technically not robots in the traditional sense, the replicants of Blade Runner remain among science fiction's most influential artificial beings. Characters like Roy Batty and Rachel forced audiences to confront difficult questions about memory, identity, mortality, and what it truly means to be human. Many consider them among the greatest artificial life forms ever depicted on screen. Talkie Toaster from Red Dwarf. Sometimes a robot doesn't need to save the world to become memorable. Talkie Toaster became a cult favorite simply by obsessively asking people if they wanted toast. Few robot characters have become so beloved while doing so little. Tom Servo and Crow T. Robot from Mystery Science Theater 3000. For generations of fans, these two wisecracking robots became as important as the movies they were mocking. Their humor and chemistry helped create one of the most beloved cult television shows ever made. What am I missing? I'm sure I'm missing plenty. You can write down what I'm missing down in the description. As we've seen throughout this journey, robots have taken many forms. Some were heroes, some were villains, some made us laugh, some frightened us, and some forced us to think about what it means to be human. From Maria's debut in Metropolis nearly a century ago to today's artificial intelligence and robotic research, fictional robots have reflected our hopes, fears, and dreams about technology. Whether it was Robot B8 warning Will Robinson, Tweaky and Dr. Theopolis exploring the future, Kit cruising down the highway, Data searching for humanity. And if I said data during my narration, I apologize. It's data. Or WALL-E finding love in a lonely universe, these characters continue to inspire generations of viewers. The remarkable thing is that many of the technologies once considered science fiction are slowly becoming reality. Today's robots can walk, they can learn, they can hold conversations, and with artificial intelligence advancing at an incredible pace, the gap between fiction and reality continues to shrink. Perhaps that's why robot stories continue to resonate. They're never really about machines, they're about us, our creativity, our curiosity, our fears, and our endless desire to understand what the future might hold. The next great robot may not come from Hollywood. It may come from a laboratory, a research center, or even your own home. And when that day arrives, it will owe a debt to nearly a century of robots that first lived in our imagination. If you enjoyed this journey through the history of robots in movies and television, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos exploring the worlds of movies, technology, science fiction, and pop culture. Thank you for watching, and remember, the future we've imagined for nearly a century may be closer than we think. Until next time, take care, and I'll see you in the next video.